Hi, this is our SAT vocabulary list 15. As I am going through these words, go ahead and take Cornell notes. Make a note of the word, make sure you're spelling it properly, the part of speech, and the definition. And as I go through and give examples, go ahead and note anything that's going to help you to remember these words in your notes. So the first word is accomplice, and an accomplice is an associate in wrongdoing. So it is someone who joins someone else to do something bad. Okay, so wrongdoing is to do something you're not supposed to do, and to be an associate is to kind of work with or participate with somebody else in the act of doing something bad. An accomplice is a noun because it's a person. So here's a picture of two guys who are clearly robbing probably a bank, and so one of them is the accomplice. They're working with the first guy to rob the bank, right? So you have an associate, a person who is joining someone else in wrongdoing, an accomplice. Two is akin. And akin, if you break down the word kin, K-I-N, actually means a person's relatives or their family. And that might help you remember what this word means. So akin describes people or things that have a similar nature, they have similar qualities. So if you're akin to someone, you share some similarities in either the way you look or the way you act or some other basic characteristics or qualities. Oftentimes, you are akin to your family members because you grew up together, or maybe you look alike because of the gene pool. And so that the word kin might help you remember that. And then you have a picture of three girls. Clearly, they're all sisters. They're dressed the same. They look akin to one another. Third word is concede, and concede is a verb, and it means to surrender, to give up, usually to give up power in some kind of situation. Concede. And make sure you spell this word correctly with the C in the middle. And the white flag is the universal symbol for surrendering, right? When you're fighting a battle with someone, the side that's surrendering will wave the white flag, so the war or the battle will end. And oftentimes in shows or cartoons, you'll also see the white flag is raised and kind of waved when one character or one person is surrendering, and this is a verb. Four is ebullient. And this is a describing word. It describes someone that's showing or something that's showing a lot of enthusiasm. They're feeling an exhilaration. They have intense, excited emotions. They're ebullient. And this is a great SAT word. Definitely will encounter this word as you go through the SATs. And so you want to think of that high energy, enthusiasm. So I have this woman who, clearly wild about being in this field. I'm not sure I'd be jumping so close to a big mud puddle, but she's ebullient. She's just overflowing with excitement and enthusiasm. Five is frigid, and frigid is an adjective. It describes something that is cold, lacking warmth. And so I would write cold in this definition too. And what's interesting about the word frigid is it can describe an environment like, ooh, it's frigid out here, I'm so cold. But it also is used a lot to describe someone who has a personality that's kind of cold. You meet someone and maybe they're not super friendly, they're a little bit aloof. Those people might be referred to as kind of frigid. They're not easy to get to know. They're not super friendly. But it can also actually, frigid describes a place, a temperature as well. Infinite is measureless. So if you think about finite, a finite resource or something that's finite is limited. Infinite means it's unlimited, it's measureless. That's why when we're kids, a lot of times people say, infinity. So it's like, oh, it's the biggest thing that we can think of, right? Because it's this limitless, measureless kind of time and space. So something that's infinite is measureless. It is it's all over. It's beyond counting. And so when we think about all of the stars in space, space itself is kind of infinite. I don't know if we know really where it stops and ends. And it would be impossible for us to count all of the stars in the sky. So that would be a good example of something that's infinite. 7 is laudable, and laudable describes an accomplishment or an act that is worth praise. It is praiseworthy. And so there's lots of accomplishments that are laudable, small things, right? So if you help someone out in a hard situation, that's a laudable act. If you graduate from high school, maybe you're the first in your family to go, that's laudable because it takes hard work and determination. 8 is nonchalance. And nonchalance is kind of a state of mind that indicates a lack of interest. And in the high school world, if you like someone and they're kind of nonchalant, it means they're acting like they don't like you back. And sometimes that's actually a really attractive quality when you're that age. But it's someone who's not showing a lot of interest in someone else or in something. And so this picture, this woman just kind of looks totally uninterested in everything around her, totally nonchalant, not interested, lacking interest. Although this woman doesn't necessarily communicate that she's like a cool nonchalant, whereas a lot of ways in which nonchalant is used is kind of to describe someone who's, they're kind of relaxed, they're cool, they don't act overly interested in things. So kind of keep that in mind, that nonchalance doesn't necessarily always have super negative connotations. 9 is preoccupy, and it's a verb. And to preoccupy means to fill your mind with something so much so that you're not aware of everything else. So to fill the mind of a person to the exclusion, right? To exclude, to shut out other subjects. So if you're so preoccupied with one thing that you don't notice anything else around you, that is a great way to use this word. So for most of us who walk around the world with our cell phones, and I'm totally guilty of this, I walk around and I'm texting and I'm tweeting and I'm on my phone and I'm playing words with friends and I'm walking around my life and I'm totally preoccupied with my phone. And sometimes I'll pass people and they'll be like, hello, and I'm like, oh, hi, because I didn't even look up. So here's a person who's clearly kind of passing the time, waiting for the subway, preoccupied on his phone. 10 is reluctant, and someone who's reluctant is unwilling. They don't really want to do something, or they're really hesitant about doing it. And so when you think about someone who's reluctant, I think about my son, and he is kind of a reluctant vegetable eater, just like this kid. This kid is not my son. And so when we have dinner, we sit down, his plate only has vegetables on it first. Otherwise, he would eat everything else and leave the vegetables. So I don't give him anything until those vegetables are eaten because he's a reluctant eater of vegetables. He's not really a big fan. He'd rather have pasta or something else. But of course, vegetables are good for you, so I want him to eat them. 11 is sensibility, and sensibility is the power to perceive or feel things. Think about sense, which is the first part of this word, and it will give you, think about your senses, to smell, taste, feel, the power to perceive or feel the world around you. That's what you can do with your senses. So sensibility is that power to perceive or feel. And if you're a big fan of Jane Austen and you think about the novel Sense and Sensibility, again, this would be a really good way to remember this word because you have the two sisters and one is so sensible and very like mentally, she's rational, and the other one has sensibility because she's so filled with this power to feel, and she's so driven by her emotions. And definitely, if anybody's ever had interactions with little kids, they're very they have a lot of sensibility. They're perceiving things all the time. They often have kind of very volatile reactions to things because of their sensibility. 12 is supplicate. And supplicate is a verb, which means to beg, to petition for something, to plead. And so the noun form of this word, which is also a word you'll encounter, is supplication, which is the act of begging or petitioning or pleading for something. So a lot of times animals will they'll be guilty of this. They'll come up to the table and they will be kind of begging for food, right? So they are supplicating, wanting something that clearly they shouldn't have. 13 is ubiquitous. This is another really fantastic word, and it describes something that is everywhere, right? It seems like it's around every corner, it permeates every part of life. And so there's lots of things that are ubiquitous that feel like they're everywhere. But for me, one of my favorite things that has become kind of ubiquitous is Starbucks. It feels like they're on corners everywhere. And now even when I travel abroad, they're all over in Europe as well, which is, if you're a big fan of Starbucks like myself, I love the ubiquitous nature of the Starbucks because it means I can get my coffee whenever and wherever I want. Decorous describes something that exhibits appropriate behavior. Think of decor, decorum. These words all have a lot in common. So when you exhibit or you act in a very appropriate way, your conduct is appropriate for a certain situation. That's when you would describe it as decorous. So here's an example of someone meeting the queen, bowing his head, showing deference, clearly acting in the appropriate way if you're going to meet royalty. And our last word is hierarchy, and it's actually very appropriate that we would see this image first and then hear the word hierarchy, because hierarchy is any system of persons or people or things that are ranked one on top of the other. And oftentimes when we think of the word hierarchy, we think of a pyramid because there's a lot of people at the bottom and then there's very few people at the top. So if you think of something like the royal family, in a country, the royal family would be at the very top of that pyramid, right? You have the king and queen if it's a monarchy, and then below them you have, back in time, you think of things like knights and the kind of middle tier, and then you think of the people kind of at the bottom of the hierarchy, which were like the serfs and the peasants. And even in our society today, we have our own hierarchy. It's not as strict as hierarchies in other countries. So if you think of something like India, where they have a caste system, it's definitely a very rigid system of people who are ranked one on top of the other, and you can't even move around within that class system. Whereas in the United States, we have maybe an economic hierarchy where people are divided by their financial income, but it's different from the hierarchy that was present back when there were monarchs and kings and queens kind of ruled.